Everything seemed too solid to crumble. Factories continued to churn, employment figures sounded optimistic, and glass skyscrapers still reflected a country that believed itself invincible. But the metallic sound of prosperity began to falter, first in whispers, then in silence. Beneath the facade of normalcy, the American machinery began to creak, and the common worker realized something had changed. The effort increased, but the return disappeared. Today, millions live the same paradox. They work more than ever but have less than before. What was once a symbol of advancement, a stable job, a home of their own, a car in the garage, has become a weight that imprisons. Families balance accounts with credit cards, and each new price increase feels like a sentence. The economy didn't collapse all at once. It is unraveling in slow motion, corroded by inequality, stagnant wages, and a system that only works as long as the population believes there is still hope. The American collapse didn't begin on the stock market, but in kitchens, in unpaid rent, and in empty refrigerators. The dream that fueled generations now serves as a curtain to hide a silent bankruptcy, not just financial, but human. And the question this video will address is inevitable. When the most powerful economy on the planet starts to bleed from within, what happens to those who live off it? The answer may be closer and more personal than you think. If you want to understand what's really behind this silent collapse, and why your salary could be the next to disappear, subscribe now and like the channel. This documentary will expose what the numbers don't show and reveal the hidden side of the American economy that no one is prepared to admit. Collapse is neither a distant event nor a future threat. It is already here, infiltrated into routines, masked by habit. Supermarket shelves remain full, but shopping carts have become symbols of scarcity. There are ever more products, but less purchasing power. Modern America lives the paradox of empty abundance, a country that produces wealth on a global scale, but leaves millions trapped in the cycle of survival. In big cities, the roar of engines mingles with the sound of doors closing permanently on small businesses that couldn't withstand the silent inflation. In once prosperous neighborhoods, for sale and for rent signs multiply, reflecting not only the financial crisis, but the emotional exhaustion of a population that has lost hope in the future. Meanwhile, the middle class, the heart of any nation, is disappearing in slow motion. Each new price increase pushes entire families into debt, and what was once a comfort has become a privilege. The cost of living rises, wages stagnate, and the promise of stability turns into a nightmare of endless bills. On the highways, drivers sleep in trucks. In the outskirts of cities, families improvise shelters in trailers and garages. There are no headlines about this, because the new collapse doesn't generate explosions or visible disasters. It spreads silently, like a social fever that the government insists on calling a temporary phase. But the real symptom isn't just the numbers, it's collective apathy. People have stopped believing they can improve their lives, and this is the first sign of a society in collapse. The economy didn't collapse overnight. It gradually emptied out until only the appearance of prosperity remained. Have you noticed this around you? How many people still live the American dream? And how many just pretend it still exists? Comment below with your opinion. They call it a cyclical crisis, a natural market adjustment, a temporary consequence. But behind these technical terms lies a precise mechanism, an invisible machine that transforms human effort into concentrated profit. While millions work ever harder to survive, a few accumulate fortunes calculated with cold mathematical precision. The American economy didn't collapse by chance. It was slowly driven here by political and financial decisions that benefit an ever smaller number of people. Interest rates, taxes, reforms, stimulus packages, everything seems designed to maintain the appearance of stability, while the system drains the vitality of those who produce. Central banks print money that never reaches the people. Corporations increase profits while cutting wages, and every indebted citizen becomes part of a silent experiment in control. Credit, once a symbol of freedom, has become the new economic leash. What is sold as a consumption opportunity is, in fact, the mechanism that traps workers in their own failure. With each new promise of financial relief, a new trap is set. More interest, more dependence, more despair. And there's something even more disturbing. The collapse isn't a system error, it's its product. The collapse of the middle class isn't a side effect. It's the fuel that keeps the top running. What's called the market is, in practice, a structure built to suck hope, time, and energy, converting humanity into statistics. When the economy becomes a game in which the common citizen never wins, the question that remains is inevitable. How much is freedom worth in a country where everything has a price, including dignity itself? But what happens when this system starts feeding on itself? When even those who control the system realize there's nothing left to take from those who have already lost everything? The impact of this silent collapse isn't limited to economic graphs. It spreads through the streets, across tired faces, and across neighborhoods that fade as time passes. Structural unemployment masquerades as retraining, while millions accept temporary jobs with no rights or future. Small towns become shadows of their former selves, with schools closed, hospitals without resources, and shopping centers transformed into modern ruins. The cost of living rises like an unabated tide, swallowing entire families and young people. Begin to see work not as a path to progress, but as a slow form of resistance. The social consequences go beyond the economy. Despair becomes collective. Apathy spreads like cultural anesthesia. Fear of tomorrow erodes any sense of stability, and people become accustomed to the idea that failure is inevitable. Inequality grows, community ties dissolve, and consumption becomes the last vestige of belonging. What was once the American dream is now a series of attempts at survival. Silently, the country is reorganizing itself into two worlds, those profiting from the crisis and those trying to survive it. A growing chasm separates the two, and the most frightening thing is realizing that it is no longer visible. It has become normal. While major capitals still mask their ruin with lights and skyscrapers, the nation's outskirts already herald the future, places where progress has vanished, but the cost of living continues to rise. Hunger, once distant, is beginning to return to urban neighborhoods. Despair, once silent, now echoes in the suburbs. But what happens when this inequality reaches its limit? When the system can no longer hide the chaos behind its veneer of prosperity? Comment below with your opinion. In statistics, collapse seems like a distant phenomenon. But when it gains a face and a name, the silence becomes heavier. Ethan, 42, was a truck driver for 2 decades. He lived on the road, transporting the same products he can no longer afford. After the pandemic, he lost his job, and with it his health insurance, his home, and his hope. Now he sleeps in his own truck, parked alongside other men in the same condition, invisible workers who fed a country that forgot them. He still turns on the radio every night, listening to news about economic growth and record highs on the stock market, while counting the coins for the next day's coffee. His story is common, but no one wants to hear it. It represents the face of an entire generation that believed effort would bring stability and now lives in a permanent state of alert. There's an America that doesn't appear in movies or advertisements. The America of people who live in daily collapse, made up of overdue bills, rationed medicine, and jobs that disappear without warning. These men and women are no exception. They are the new norm. People who still work, but no longer live. Who still dream, but without believing anything can change. Ethan sums up the feeling with a short sentence, spoken between sobs and exhaustion. It wasn't the crisis that destroyed me. It was the time I wasted trying to believe it would end. The human side of the collapse is the most devastating because it cannot be measured in numbers, only in silences. But how many Ethans are there still out there, fighting to keep alive a hope that the system itself insists on extinguishing? Behind the individual stories, the numbers reveal a reality that dismantles any discourse of prosperity. Today, more than 40 million Americans rely on food banks to survive, a number that surpasses the rates of the Great Depression. Of every 10 citizens, 7 live paycheck to paycheck without any financial reserves. About 60% of the population would not be able to handle an emergency, only $400, and almost 20 million people are in default on student loans they will never be able to pay off. While the average worker struggles to pay rent, corporate profits hit all-time highs on Wall Street, market growth is celebrated. In the suburbs, the number of families having to choose between food and medicine is growing. The national debt exceeds $35 trillion, and the government tries to contain the deficit by printing more money, a measure that only postpones the inevitable. Inflation erodes purchasing power and turns survival into a daily calculation. These numbers aren't just economic data, they're symptoms of a structure that's already crumbling. Behind every statistic lies a face, a story, a collective failure. Disguised as normality, collapse is no longer a risk, it's become routine. And the more the rhetoric of economic recovery is repeated, the further from the truth becomes. America isn't rebuilding, it's adapting to its own ruin. The difference is that now the collapse is not seen on the streets but in bank accounts on empty shelves, in the forced smiles of those who pretend to be fine. But if all this is already happening before the eyes of the world, why does almost no one seem to react? The future doesn't start tomorrow. It's already begun, and it carries the same semblance of normalcy that precedes every major downturn. The collapse won't come with sirens or alarmist headlines, but with an increasingly expensive, silent, and hopeless routine. Every month, more people disappear from official statistics, trading jobs for odd jobs and permanent homes for makeshift trailers. New generations grow up without a horizon, believing that stability is a myth of their parents. The system, once the engine of prosperity, now survives by fueling its own chaos. When a nation loses faith in its own future, no economy can sustain it. Money loses value, but what truly disintegrates is the collective sense, the idea of belonging, purpose, and community. Wealthy cities become islands surrounded by silent, invisible poverty. And while indicators insist that everything is under control, the signs of collapse are already multiplying. Mass layoffs, collapsing credit, inflation masked by statistics, and an emotionally exhausted population. This is the critical point at which a civilization begins to forget who it is. When work no longer guarantees dignity and money no longer buys hope, what remains is not just poverty, it is dehumanization. The warning has been sounded, but few heed it. Ruin comes disguised as progress, and despair has learned to smile for the cameras. But if this is the present, what will become of tomorrow? What happens when the American dream ceases to be a dream and becomes just a distant memory? The collapse didn't begin with the collapse of the banks, nor with runaway inflation. It began when people stopped believing. The deepest crisis isn't economic, it's spiritual. The loss of confidence in a meaningful future. America, once a symbol of freedom and abundance, now lives hostage to its own haste, fueling a machine that turns lives into debt and dreams into statistics. On the corners of big cities, there's a new kind of silence, that of a society that works, consumes, and exhausts itself, no longer knowing why. While the spotlight remains on the stock market, the real collapse is happening inside homes, in empty stares and whispered prayers amid overdue bills. When the people stop believing, the nation ceases to exist. Silent collapse doesn't destroy buildings, it destroys what's human within them. If you believe the truth needs to be told, subscribe to the channel. Together we'll expose what the system tries to hide, because understanding the collapse is the first step to surviving it.